After that meeting, I couldn't get her words out of my head. "Everyone's free except you, Ethan." She said it calmly without emotion. Yet, there was something in her voice that made me freeze. It didn't sound like a simple request to stay after the meeting. It felt like an invitation into another reality, one I wasn't ready to enter. Everyone left. The door closed softly, and we were alone in the big glass office. She stood by the window, her back to me, holding a folder in her hands. I waited for her to speak, but she didn't. The only sounds were the hum of the air conditioner and the city settling into the evening outside. "Sit down, Ethan," she finally said without turning around. I sat, feeling a mix of nerves, curiosity, and something else I couldn't name. I'd only worked at the company for a year, and until that moment, she'd spoken to me only in brief professional phrases during meetings. Margaret Hayes, our CEO, the woman everyone in the office talked about, but no one really knew. 45 years old, always composed, always perfect. I'd seen her dozens of times at meetings in hallways by the coffee machine. But that evening, she looked different. Tired, but beautiful. Her hair wasn't perfectly pinned up, and a few loose strands fell across her cheek. There was something real in that imperfection. She placed the folder on the desk and looked straight at me. "You made this presentation, right?" I nodded. "Good work, but there's a mistake in the numbers. I want you to stay and fix it." "Of course," I said, trying to hide the pounding in my chest. She came closer and I caught her perfume, warm, expensive, with a hint of coffee and jasmine. She leaned toward the screen, touching the keyboard to show where to correct the formula. Her hand brushed against mine for just a second, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. "See," she said. I didn't. All I could hear was the rush of my heartbeat. "Yes, I see now," I muttered. She smiled. Not for the first time in her life, but for the first time at me. "Good. Don't be so nervous. It's just work." I tried to joke back. "I'm just afraid to do something wrong." She looked at me for a moment longer than she should have. "Maybe I want you not to do everything by the rules," she whispered. That line hung between us. I didn't know how to respond. She turned her gaze back to the monitor, then to me again. "We'll finish this tonight." We worked for another 20 minutes. She kept moving closer, sometimes resting her hand lightly on my shoulder to point something out. At moments, I caught her eyes, and they weren't the eyes of a boss anymore. They were a woman's eyes, and that scared me. Scared me because I knew something had started, and it wasn't work. When we finally finished, she exhaled. "Good. That's enough for today." I gathered my things, but she didn't move. She stood by the window, looking out into the darkness. "Have you ever thought," she said quietly, "that sometimes it's worth staying even when everyone else has already left?" I didn't answer. She turned toward me, her expression calm, but her gaze steady enough to unnerve me. "Good night, Margaret Hayes," I said. "Good night, Ethan," she replied. And in her voice, there was something I'd remember forever. I walked out of the office, but breathing felt difficult. Felt like I'd left behind not just work, but something more. Something that had only just begun. The next morning, the office felt different. Or maybe it was just me. Every time I passed her door, I caught myself slowing down, listening for her voice, the sound of her heels on the floor, anything. It was ridiculous. She was my boss, a woman who ran one of the most respected firms in the city. And yet, after last night, I couldn't think straight. When she walked in, everything seemed to stop for a second. The air itself changed. She was wearing a beige blouse, hair tied loosely, glasses on, calm, professional, unreachable. But when our eyes met for a brief moment, I swear there was something behind that calm, something that made my heart skip. "Ethan," she said as she passed by. Nothing unusual, just my name, but it sounded different now, warmer. I spent the morning buried in work, trying to shake it off. Around noon, my colleague Daniel Pierce leaned over my desk. "You look like a man who hasn't slept," he said. I smirked. "Didn't. Hayes had me fixing the report till late. The dragon lady," he joked. "Man, I don't know how you handle her. She terrifies me." I laughed, but inside his words hit differently. Terrifying wasn't what I felt. It was magnetic. Just after 6, as most people started to leave, a message appeared on my screen. Conference room 7 p.m. Bring the updated file. MH. My stomach dropped again. I stared at the message for a long second before typing a simple sure. When I walked into the conference room later, she was already there sitting by the window sipping coffee. The city lights behind her painted a faint glow around her figure. "You're on time," she said softly. "That's rare in this office." "You told me not to keep you waiting," I replied. She smiled barely, but enough. "Smart man." I handed her the file, and she flipped through it silently. "Much better," she said finally, closing the folder. "I wanted to thank you for staying last night. Most wouldn't. You didn't give me much choice," I teased. She chuckled quietly. "True. I tend to get what I want." For a few seconds, we just looked at each other. Then she stood up and walked toward the coffee machine. "Would you like one?" she asked over her shoulder. "Coffee? Yeah, sure." I watched her pour 2 cups. Her movements calm, graceful. When she handed mine over, our fingers brushed again like déjà vu. "Do you ever stop working?" I asked. "Only when someone gives me a reason to," she said. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with something we both pretended not to feel. "Why me?" I finally asked. "Out of everyone, why do you keep me here?" She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Because you remind me what it's like to still care about something." My breath caught. She turned away before I could answer. "Don't read too much into it, Ethan," she added, though her voice betrayed the words. "It's just an observation." The meeting ended like the last one. Quietly, she walked me to the door. But before I left, she said, "There's a cafe 2 blocks away. Tomorrow after work. No emails, no files." I froze. "You mean coffee, Ethan?" "Just coffee." I nodded, though my heart was pounding. "All right, just coffee." She smiled. A soft, knowing smile that made me doubt my own words. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Margaret Hayes." The next day couldn't come fast enough. I found myself rehearsing what to say, what not to say, how not to sound like a fool. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at the corner table, hair down this time, a casual blazer over a white blouse. She looked nothing like a CEO. She looked real. "You're late," she said playfully as I sat down. "Traffic," I lied. She sipped her latte and leaned back. "So, what do you do when you're not surviving my meetings?" "Mostly recover from them," I joked. She laughed. And for the first time, it wasn't polite. It was warm, almost intimate. We talked about everything except work, music, movies, the city. Hours passed like minutes. At one point, a couple nearby started arguing, and she leaned closer to me, whispering, "People forget how to talk. That's the real reason things fall apart." Her breath brushed my ear. I turned to her, and for a second our faces were inches apart. Neither of us moved. Then she smiled and looked away. "We should go," she said softly. "It's getting late." I walked her to her car. The night air was cool, the street lights flickering. Before she got in, she turned to me and said, "You're a good man, Ethan. Don't let the world convince you otherwise." I wanted to say something back, something real, but all I managed was "good night." She smiled one last time and drove away. I stood there for a long while, watching the tail lights fade into the dark, realizing I was already in far deeper than I should have been. The next week felt like a blur. We went back to our usual roles, CEO and employee. But something had shifted. She smiled more often. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me during meetings, and she'd quickly glance away. Once she even laughed at one of my sarcastic comments in front of everyone. That never happened before. People started noticing. Daniel Pierce nudged me one afternoon and whispered, "Man, what's going on between you and the boss? She's been way too nice lately." I shrugged, pretending to be clueless. But inside, I felt that strange mix of fear and excitement again. That evening, I stayed late to finish a proposal. The office was quiet. The lights dimmed except for the glow from my monitor. Suddenly, I heard her heels. That steady, confident rhythm down the hallway. My pulse quickened before she even appeared in the doorway. "Still here?" she asked. "Someone's got to keep the company running," I said, half joking. She smiled and leaned against the doorframe. "You could have gone home hours ago and miss another one of your surprise visits." I shot back. She tilted her head, amused. "You think I plan these? You plan everything?" She laughed softly, that low, genuine sound that always disarmed me. "Fair enough," she said, walking closer. The air thickened. The sound of the city outside faded. She stopped right beside my desk, her perfume subtle but intoxicating. "You've been doing great work lately," she said. "I noticed these things." "Thank you," I said, trying not to sound nervous. "You know," she continued, her tone lowering slightly. "I used to be like you, ambitious, hungry, always trying to prove something." I looked up and now she smiled faintly. "Now I just try not to lose what I've already built." For a few seconds we just stood there. No pretense, no titles, just two people who'd seen too much of life to pretend otherwise. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and sighed. "I should go," she said quietly. "Board call in the morning." I nodded. "Of course." She started toward the door, but then paused. "Ethan," she said without turning, "are you free this weekend?" My heart stopped. Yeah. Why?" "There's a company retreat upstate. Usually, I go alone, but this year I could use someone I trust." "You mean professionally, right?" I said, forcing a smile. She turned slightly and the corner of her mouth curved. "Let's say both." Saturday came faster than I expected. The retreat was at a quiet lakeside lodge surrounded by pine trees. When I arrived, she was already there. Jeans, light sweater, no makeup. I almost didn't recognize her. "This place doesn't suit you," I said. "No glass offices, no conference tables." "Exactly," she said, picking up a rock and tossing it into the lake. "That's why I come here, to remember there's more than the next deal." We spent the day hiking, talking about things that had nothing to do with work. Childhood memories, regrets, dreams that got lost somewhere along the way. I learned she'd been married once years ago. Her husband passed suddenly, and since then she'd buried herself in work. "People think being strong means not feeling anything," she said as we sat on a bench watching the sunset. "But that's just surviving, not living." I wanted to tell her she didn't have to be strong all the time, that I saw through the armor, but I didn't. I just sat there beside her, listening to the wind. When the evening chills set in, she shivered slightly. I offered her my jacket. She accepted it, draping it over her shoulders. And for a moment our hands brushed. She didn't pull away. "You're a good man, Ethan," she whispered. "Don't let that change. And you," I said quietly, "should let someone take care of you for once." Her eyes met mine, soft and searching. For the first time, she looked vulnerable. The silence between us was heavy, full of everything we couldn't say. Then slowly she leaned in. Not for a kiss, but just enough for her head to rest against my shoulder. "Just this," she murmured. For a moment, I nodded, feeling her warmth, the weight of her trust. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, and for the first time in a long while, neither of us felt alone. But deep down, I knew moments like that don't stay forever, and somehow that made it even more real. When we returned from the retreat, everything felt different. The office looked the same. Glass walls, fluorescent lights, polite smiles, but underneath there was something unspoken, something only she and I knew. We didn't talk about that evening by the lake, the silence, or how her head rested on my shoulder until the stars came out. But every time our eyes met across the conference room, it was their invisible but undeniable occurrence connection. One morning I was grabbing coffee when Daniel Pierce leaned over and whispered, "You know the boss has been smiling more since the weekend, right? What did you do?" "Fix her Wi-Fi." I laughed it off, but my chest tightened. People were starting to notice, and that scared me. Later that day, she called me into her office. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes betrayed something softer. "Close the door," she said. My pulse jumped. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said, walking to the window. "But we need to be careful. People talk." I hesitated. "We didn't do anything wrong." "Maybe not," she said, still looking out at the skyline. But perception can destroy truth faster than facts can save it. She turned, her voice quieter now. You're good at what you do, Ethan. I don't want anyone thinking you're getting ahead because of me. I swallowed hard. And what do you think? For a moment, her expression softened. I think you make me forget how lonely this office can feel. The room fell silent. Outside, the city kept moving. Horns, footsteps, life. But inside, everything felt still. I'll keep my distance. I finally said, if that's what you want. She sighed, crossing her arms. That's not what I want. It's what I should want. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and left. For the next week, I buried myself in work. Emails, reports, late nights, anything to distract myself. But then came Thursday. She sent a short message. Stay after the meeting. When the meeting ended, everyone filtered out except us. She stayed seated, looking at the notes in front of her as if she was afraid to meet my eyes. Finally, she spoke. Do you ever think about that night? Every day, I said honestly. Then why are you pretending it didn't happen? Because you told me to, I said quietly. Because I thought it would make things easier for you. She looked up and I saw something in her eyes. Exhaustion, maybe fear, maybe longing. I thought I could keep it professional, she said. But every time I see you, every time you speak, she stopped herself, then shook her head. Forget it. No, I said, stepping closer. Say it. Every time you're near, I forget who I'm supposed to be. The words hit like a spark. Before I could think, I reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. The air between us was electric. Then suddenly she exhaled and gently freed her hand. You need to go, Ethan. You don't mean that. I do, she said, but her voice broke slightly. Please. I hesitated, then nodded. Okay. I left the room, but my heart didn't follow. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words, her voice trembling just enough to betray what she was trying to hide. Around midnight, I got a message from her. Just 3 words. Are you awake? I stared at it for a long time before typing back. Yes. A few minutes later, another message appeared. Meet me downstairs. Don't tell anyone. I didn't even grab a jacket. When I stepped outside, she was there, standing near her car, hair down, wearing a simple gray coat, no power, no armor, just her. I couldn't stop thinking. She said, her voice almost a whisper about the lake, about us. Then stop trying, I said. She looked up at me, the street light catching the reflection in her eyes. You don't understand, she said. If this goes wrong, I lose everything. And if it goes right, I asked. She smiled sadly. Then maybe I finally find something worth losing it for. She took a deep breath, then stepped closer. The distance between us disappeared. The city hummed quietly around us. But for that moment, the world felt smaller. Just her and me under the cold night air. She didn't say another word. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said everything. And when she finally leaned forward and kissed me, it wasn't passion. It was surrender. Quiet, real, dangerous, and completely inevitable. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of silence that feels like a warning. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from the office, from Daniel Pierce, from HR, but not from her. I already knew something had happened. When I arrived, the entire floor felt colder. People avoided eye contact. Whispers floated like smoke. On her door, there was a printed note. In meetings all day, but her office light was off. By noon, Daniel Pierce leaned on my desk and said quietly, They're saying the board found out. About you too? My heart sank. That's not true, I said. But it sounded weak even to me. Doesn't matter if it's true, he muttered. It's out there now. That night, I stayed late, waiting for her. Around 10 o'clock, I finally saw her walk in. No heels, no confidence, just exhaustion. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. Neither should you, I replied. She gave a faint smile. They've asked me to take a leave of absence. Because of me, because of us, she said. The words hurt more than I expected. I wanted to argue, to promise I'd fix everything, but instead, I asked, "What happens now?" She sighed. "I don't know. Maybe we take some time. Maybe it's better this way." "Do you believe that?" "No," she whispered. "But I have to say it." I stepped closer, unable to stop myself. "You said once you forget who you're supposed to be when I'm around. Maybe that's not a bad thing." She looked up, eyes tired but shining. "Ethan, you're 27. You have a life ahead of you. I'm already halfway through mine. So what?" I said. "You make it sound like time cancels feeling." "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "It just makes it harder to believe in forever." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The office lights dimmed automatically at midnight, leaving us in a soft golden glow. She walked to her desk, opened a drawer, and took out the silver locket she always wore. "You once asked what's inside," she said, pressing it into my hand. "It used to be a picture of my husband. He died 8 years ago, but I took it out a long time ago. I just never told anyone." I opened it carefully. Empty. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because maybe it's time someone else fills that space," she said. She touched my cheek briefly, just enough to leave warmth. Then she turned and walked out. I didn't chase her. Couldn't. The next few weeks were a blur. HR handled her resignation quietly. Her office went to someone new. Her nameplate disappeared like she'd never been there. But every morning, I'd still glance at that glass door, expecting to see her reflection. One evening, a month later, I came home to find an envelope under my door. No return address. Inside was a note in her handwriting. "You once told me not to run from something real. I didn't. I just needed time to remember who I was before I met you so I can come back as who I want to be with you." At the bottom was a single line. "Don't wait up, but don't forget me either." I read it over and over until the words blurred. I didn't know where she went. Maybe Paris, maybe just the coast. But I knew I'd see her again because some people don't leave your life. They just step out of the frame until the story is ready for them again. Months passed. I worked, lived, pretended to move on. Then one evening as I was leaving the office, the elevator doors opened and there she was. Same curls, same quiet confidence, same soft locket now hanging from her neck again. "You kept it," I said. "You left it," she replied, smiling faintly. "But I think it belongs to both of us now." The hallway was empty, the city alive beyond the glass. "Are you staying?" I asked. She looked up at me, eyes glimmering with that familiar light. "That depends," she said. "Is the meeting over?" I smiled, shaking my head. "No," I whispered. "Not even close." She stepped closer, her hand brushing mine. For the first time, there was no fear, no hesitation, just quiet certainty. Two people who had finally stopped running from what was always meant to.